Labour's proposal for just 5 locally led rape gang inquiries has been blasted as a disgraceful whitewash by survivors and campaigners. And with 73% of all voters, including actually 75% of Labour voters in a GB News poll demanding now that full national inquiry, is this scandal now simply too big to ignore? Well, let's remind ourselves what the Home Secretary Yvette Cooper had to say yesterday.
Effective local inquiries can delve into far more local detail and deliver more locally relevant answers and change than a lengthy nationwide inquiry can provide. So Tom Crowther, KC, chair of the Telford inquiry, has agreed to work with the government to develop a new framework for victim-centred, locally led inquiries where they are needed, and as a first step, to work with Oldham Council and up to 4 other pilot areas.
Well, for more on this and the big political stories of the day, I'm delighted to say I'm joined in the studio by Christopher Hope, our political editor, and the Shadow Justice Secretary, Mr. Robert Jenrick. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Chris, I'm sorry, I'm going to go with Robert first today, if that's OK. Thanks for coming to the studio.
It's my pleasure.
Much appreciated. Let's start on Yvette Cooper yesterday. Have to say, we spoke to survivors straight after that announcement. It happened during my show, and they were seething. They were utterly furious. 5 out of 50 towns, no legal teeth to compel people to actually turn up, no power to put them in jail, £5 million for 5 towns when the Telford inquiry cost £8 million alone. It was absolutely lambasted by survivors and by almost all of our viewers. What's your take on what was proposed yesterday?
Well, look, I think it's welcome that more is happening. Just a week ago, Keir Starmer was condemning those of us who were calling for more as people jumping on a far-right bandwagon. They've changed their tune, but this clearly isn't enough, is it? For all the reasons you've just set out, thanks to GB News, we know that these rape gangs are operating in at least 50 places across the country, and yet this is only going to take it up in 5. Local inquiries do not have the powers to get to the truth. You can't request witnesses to come. They're not giving evidence under oath. You can't ensure that the documents are coming forward. And we've already seen their limitations, because there was one in Greater Manchester where the 2 people who were leading it ultimately resigned because they said it didn't work. We need to have a full national inquiry. This is one of the biggest and worst scandals in modern British history. Not a single public official has ever been held to account for this. There is so much more we need to know. And I am certain that there are vulnerable young girls in towns and cities, the length and breadth of our country, who today are still being victims of this scandal. We've got to stop that. I
think you're absolutely right. I mean, we hear from them all the time. This is still going on as we speak. Do you think we've got to the point now where we just won't swallow this anymore? Perhaps even in the past, this would be, oh, great, there's going to be 5 inquiries, there's going to be an audit by Baroness Louise Casey, oh, tickety-boo. But we're at a point now, I think, people just know that these inquiries don't have any teeth. They demand more. Do you think that this 3-month audit could get us to the point where actually Baroness Casey says, well, actually, we do need that full inquiry? Will that give the Labour Party the political cover? I'm trying to be glass half full about this. Do you think we'll get to that point?
Well, I hope so. And I do have some confidence in Louise Casey. Louise was sent in by Eric Pickles, the then Secretary of State, to be the Commissioner in Rotherham. And she wrote an excoriating report about what she found in Rotherham. And she went in even after Professor Jay had done a report into that place, and she said nothing had changed. There was a culture of denial. There was cover-ups by the officials. So a lot now rests on Louise Casey's shoulders if Yvette Cooper and Keir Starmer are not willing to take action today. And I hope that Louise will recommend that we have the full national inquiry and get to the truth of what's really going on across the country.
Chris?
I thought Yvette Cooper kind of went there yesterday. She said there's 127 major police investigations across 29 different forces. That does suggest a national problem. Not everyone agrees, though, do they, Martin and Robert? David Greenwood, this sister representing 60 or so victims on my podcast today, Chopper's Political Podcast, he doesn't want a national inquiry. He thinks the money spent, which might be £200 million, typically on a judge-led inquiry, should go instead on implementing J. Get the J inquiry. The
J report didn't even mention grooming gangs. It mentioned Pakistanis once. It mentioned Muslims 3 times. The J report is widely acknowledged as a blunt tool.
But what it recommended will stop the suffering now, is his point. It's all very well going back over the past. Where do you stop going back over the past? The J recommendations, notably mandatory reporting, some kind of fund to pay out on the compensation for these damaged young women in their 20s who often present 10 years after the event. Deal with that first and then do a national inquiry.
But Chris, I think that You can do two things at once.
Yeah.
In no other scandal have I ever heard it said that you couldn't try and fix problems now whilst also delving into what's really happened. You know, when we had the terrible Grenfell tragedy, no one said, don't have a national inquiry. Or no one said, whilst there is a national inquiry, don't try and get dangerous cladding off buildings. You can obviously do two things at once. And important, though, is to implement the recommendations of Jay, like mandatory reporting. You know, it doesn't really require that, does it? What's happened here is that cowardly people in local councils or police officers or, frankly, politicians, some of whom are now members of parliament, didn't act when they knew what was happening. And we've got to change that culture and understand what really motivated them.
I have to ask you the question that's been asked many times before, and it's great being wise after the event, but why didn't the Conservatives implement a full national inquiry during those 14 years in power?
Well, I think we probably should have done, shouldn't we? I think everyone in public life has to ask themselves, why didn't they do more? Now, we did do things. We created the 2 J reports. We sent Louise Casey into Rotherham to try and find out what was going on and to change it. We created the Grooming Gangs Task Force under Suella Braverman, which led to 550 people being arrested. I called last year for full life sentences for grooming gang perpetrators and for those who have foreign nationalities to be sent out of this country so they never step foot here again. But could we have done more? Yes. We do know more now today, thanks to people like Charlie Peters here on GB News. We know that this is happening almost everywhere in the country, at least 50 towns. And not just, you know, places in the north or the Midlands, but we know it's happening in High Wycombe and Aylesbury and all manner of places. And so the sheer scale and breadth of this was not known previously. It is known today. We've got to take action.
OK, thank you. I'd like to speak... get you now on our next story. Yesterday, in fact, sat in that very chair where you are, I spoke with Margaret Mizzen, who was Jimmy Mizzen's mum, yesterday, who said that the BBC has still not apologised after they showed music of a drill rapper who murdered her son.
I think it's absolutely beyond disgraceful. I can't believe that the BBC would do this. Now, I know that at the moment they're saying, well, they didn't know who he was, etc., but there must be ways of looking at these things. You know, perhaps people show their passports with a name or something, but they're making excuses. There's no excuses. They played his music, and you're playing the music of someone who's committed murder.
You know, Mr. Gerry, I was so touched by her. She had such amazing powers of forgiveness. She said after everything that she's been through, and her boy was murdered when he was just 16, this bloke got less time in prison than her son had been alive. This creature, Jake Farley, got 15 years. He meant to get life. He was left out. He was rapping. He was promoted on the BBC. He was rapping using the murder of her son as material. He's been subsequently banged up back in jail today because guess what? The silly little boy was filmed in an area of the country he wasn't meant to be. What would you do? You're the Shadow Justice Secretary. People feel they're let out of jail too soon. They're allowed to profit off of death. This is completely and utterly wrong.
Yeah, well, firstly, I thought the poise and the dignity of Jimmy Mizzen's mum last night on GB News was astonishing. Very few people would be able to react to a situation like this in the manner that she did. I think the BBC owe her an apology. Yeah. I am disgusted that they have not done so. I know that you have asked for their comment. They still haven't given one to GB News. They've screwed up in an incredible way here. Imagine putting the music, promoting the music career of a murderer on the BBC. Songs that glamorise violence. This is an appalling error of judgment by the BBC. She deserves an apology, and there now needs to be a proper investigation as to how this could happen so that it never happens again. I also think the Ministry of Justice, frankly, should investigate how this murderer could brazenly be promoting himself with music glamorising violence, glamorising the very crime for which he was previously in prison, and yet nothing happened until the media found out about this. It became a national story. Now he's back in jail where he belongs, but something has gone very, very badly wrong in the Ministry of Justice, in the probation service, and we need to get to the bottom of that so we have answers.
Some of the lyrics in his words, his songs were literally saying, seeing blood spilled same floor he was left on. Jimmy Mizzen died on the floor of a bakery after he had his arteries and his neck severed by this creature. It's just an incredibly upsetting situation to be. Do you think there's a much bigger conversation about how he seems to be so soft on crime? People like this, he got a life sentence. Why was he let out?
Yeah, look, I agree. You know, I believe that prison is there for a purpose. We need to ensure that people are locked up for longer. I have a campaign around career criminals, the people who are responsible for so many crimes today, and the public are rightly appalled when they see people who have committed the most serious crimes, like this disgusting individual getting out of prison early and then able, seemingly with impunity, to go and mock his victim, you know, valorise his crime, and the Minister of Justice, the authorities are doing nothing about it until it hits the front pages of newspapers.
Okay, I've got a quick statement to read out here. You are correct to say the BBC has refused to comment on whether they would apologise to Jimmy's mother, Margaret, but they have said about Jake Farry. This individual does not feature on any BBC playlists. We have never played, as we pointed out to The Sun, the lyrics they have printed. He's had 2 other tracks played twice. One extra has no further plan to play his music. We were not aware of his background, and we in no way condone his actions. See, sorry is the hardest word to say. Just say sorry. Just say sorry to Margaret Mizzen. That's all we've got to do. She sat here yesterday and she said, I'd be happy if they just said sorry. Just find it in yourselves to do the right thing. Now, we've gone to the Attorney General for comments, but we've had no response as yet. But Lord Hermer has previously said this: I have seen how lawyers themselves become targets, including assassinations of many people known to the organisations I have worked with. This is about the other story, isn't it? Yeah, we're talking about this other story first. This is about the story this week. Gerry Adams potentially could be receiving a taxpayer-funded compensation scheme. Robert Jenrick, I know it's something that gets you very, very hot under the collar. Tell us your take.
Look, there are mounting questions now around the Attorney General, Lord Hermer, who is one of the closest friends and associates of the Prime Minister, and we've had no answers. We now need transparency, and no question is more pressing than did the Attorney General recuse himself from whether or not the government should drop an appeal into a case that had been previously heard in the High Court. The Attorney General was, until last year, Gerry Adams' lawyer, and then a few months ago, the government decided not to proceed with an appeal, the consequence of which is likely to be the government having to pay out millions of pounds to IRA terrorists and sympathisers, to people like Gerry Adams. We need to know what was the role of the Attorney General. Did he recuse himself, or did he have a massive conflict of interest by getting involved in this case when he was previously the lawyer of Gerry Adams?
Chris.
Number 10 has tried to explain this today, Robert Jenrick. They say there's an established system to ensure that law officers are not consulted on cases which could give rise to conflict of interest. They say that there's an established process on declarations. Any decisions about the Legacy Act, which is what you're just talking about, were taken by the Northern Ireland office, and they point out that Lord Hermer did represent Gerry Adams as well as the family of a young dead British soldier. So they do represent different people all the time, and they can do 2 cases involving contrasting positions at the same time, they say.
I mean, this is an extraordinary situation. There's no precedent for this. Keir Starmer has appointed someone as Attorney General who has built his career representing cases against the government of the United Kingdom. He represented Gerry Adams. He represented Shamima Begum. He's represented individuals in the Afghanistan inquiry, which is against members of our own special forces. He always seems to be on the side of those people who hate this country, who are fighting the British government. He now finds himself as our own Attorney General, and time and again, there's going to be questions about conflicts of interest. How is he going to provide advice to the government, to the Prime Minister on these issues? Is he recusing himself? He's refusing to be clear about that, hiding behind conventions which were designed to protect ministers, never to protect the Attorney General against accusations of conflicts of interest. It is hard to see how he can continue to do his job properly. He needs to be honest and transparent now, or else his position is going to be increasingly untenable.
OK, let's read that statement that I prematurely went to a moment ago. As I said, we've gone to the Attorney-General for a comment but have had no response. But Lord Hermer has previously said this: I have seen how lawyers themselves become targets, including assassinations of many people known to the organisations I've worked with and supported. I have seen in most bloody terms what happens when you undermine faith in integral parts of the rule of law system. And asked whether he had been paid by Mr. Adams on a no-win, no-fee basis, he said, I'm afraid I can't recall. And even if I could recall, I'm not sure I would feel inclined to answer a question as to the basis on which I was paid by any given client. Well, there we go. That's as clear as mud. Let's quickly, while we have you here, Mr. Jenrick, ask you about pensions. The Prime Minister, the leader of the opposition, Kemi Badenoch, was on a radio station yesterday when asked by a caller about the triple lock. She seemed to hint that it could be looked at. It could be taken away. Needless to say, pensioners aren't especially happy.
Look, we're fiscal conservatives. It's right that we look at means testing because, the welfare state needs to be targeted on the people who need it most. So what Kemi was referring to was, are there places where we could means test properly? Not the triple lock. And she's been very clear about that today.
Why talk about it at all? It's like
I think it's like dementia tax, If you look at what she actually said, she was talking about the principle of means testing and saying that there are places where we should be means testing because we want to look after taxpayers' money and spend it wisely. And there are examples where the Labour government is doing completely the opposite. Look at winter fuel allowance, for example, where they're not means testing properly. There are poor pensioners, people living on as little as £13,000
but the winter fuel
allowance, see that going. But she was not saying that we should means test the triple lock. We created the triple lock. We implemented it, we defended it for 14 years, it was in our last manifesto.
The backlash on the winter fuel allowance has taught the entire nation one thing: don't mess with the silver pension vote. Why even talk about it? This is your voter base. It's like over 65 is the average age of Conservative voters.
The triple lock is a Conservative policy. It's been an important policy that we have continued with for all our years in government. Kemi was not saying that that was going to change. What she was saying was, rightly, we should be concerned about means testing so that in other parts of the welfare system, we're making sure the money is being spent wisely.
OK. Chris, anything further?
Well, are you worried about this, that we have to keep, your team keeps clearing up after what Kemi Badenoch says? Maternity pay in the party conference, that need to be looked at. They had to clarify it wasn't maternity pay. They're not going to cut new mums' pay when they have babies. And now we have this issue with the triple lock. Is there a problem here? I mean, Kemi Badenoch said she'd be honest about what she meant, but perhaps she needs some help explaining what she means. We waited until lunchtime today to get these clarifications on Twitter.
No, look, I think she was actually clear if you listen to the clip back. What she was referring to was the idea of means testing. I think any of us who believe in taxpayer value should be concerned about that. There will be places where we can think carefully about that, but one of them is not likely to be the triple lock.
Super, Robert Jenrick, an absolute delight to have you in the show. Thank you very, very much.